He had always been someone who believed that life was meant for taking risks. Every day. He walked into the high-rise building of one of the country's biggest investment firms with a sense of purpose that some called arrogance and others called confidence. He had worked hard to get here, starting from the ground up, learning every detail of finance, investments, and the art of reading people who made decisions with millions of dollars at stake. Over the years, his reputation had grown. He was known as the man who could turn almost any deal into gold. His colleagues respected him, and clients trusted him, often putting enormous sums of money under his management. But with each success, he felt a hunger that no achievement seemed to satisfy. It was on a gray Monday morning, with the city below buzzing with traffic and ambition, that he first heard about the account. The rumors had been whispered among a few senior colleagues, mostly in hushed tones and in private corners where gossip was considered information. They spoke of a $200 million account that was unlike anything anyone had ever seen. It was so complex, so large, and so carefully hidden that even the most experienced managers had been wary of touching it. Some called it a golden opportunity. Others warned that it was a trap, a financial mirage that could swallow anyone whole. He sat in his office, looking out of the floor-to-ceiling windows, thinking about what it meant. $200 million. The number was almost impossible to imagine in one's mind. He had handled millions before, sometimes tens of millions, but this was on a whole different level. He could feel a spark of excitement and a touch of fear. He had never liked fear, not the kind that freezes you. Fear was something he liked to conquer. This account felt like a challenge calling his name. His phone rang, breaking his thoughts. It was one of the senior partners, someone he trusted for guidance, but also someone who could be brutally honest. The conversation was brief, almost cryptic. The partner warned him to be careful, to look closely at every document, every transfer, every signature. This is not ordinary. Even for you, the voice said, a subtle seriousness under the calm tone. He nodded silently, though the partner couldn't see him. He understood the warning, but instead of feeling deterred, he felt more drawn. It was as if the caution was a dare, a silent challenge to his skills. He spent the next few days digging into the initial documents he was allowed to see. He reviewed balance sheets, statements, and a series of complex transactions that had already taken months to compile. Every line seemed ordinary, yet there was an underlying rhythm that only someone with his experience could notice. Something about the account felt almost alive, as if it was moving in ways that required someone sharp enough to keep up. And he liked that. He liked the idea of a challenge, something that would test him, make him push beyond what he had done before. At lunch, he barely touched his food. His mind was on the account, on the possibilities. He imagined the meetings with potential clients, the deals he could make, the influence he could gain. He even allowed himself a brief fantasy, being invited to exclusive gatherings. Being a name people whispered with admiration, a man who tamed the untamable. Yet, beneath the excitement, there was a tiny, almost invisible voice of doubt. It whispered that the account might be dangerous, that it might be more complicated than anyone realized. But he pushed it aside. Doubt was the companion of those who did not dare. And he was someone who dared by midweek. He had arranged a private meeting with the team that had been responsible for the account before him. They were cautious, almost nervous. They explained how the account had been untouched for months, how its movements were irregular, and how even the most experienced managers had hesitated. He listened carefully, taking notes, asking questions, pushing for clarity. He noticed the subtle tension in the room, the unspoken fear that no one wanted to voice. Instead of feeling worried, he felt a rush of confidence. This was what he had trained for, what he had worked his entire life to handle. Others hesitated. He would step forward. The first time he saw the full portfolio, he couldn't hide his surprise. The numbers were staggering, the variety of investments breathtaking. There were legitimate ventures, speculative ones, and a few that seemed almost unreal in their scale. It was a puzzle, a complex web of financial decisions that required not just knowledge, but instinct, courage, and precision. He leaned back in his chair, letting the weight of it sink in. He could feel the thrill coursing through him. This was it, the opportunity that could define him, to elevate him to heights that others could only dream of. In the days that followed, he began to plan. He wanted to approach this account not just with skill, but with strategy. He reviewed every possible scenario, every risk factor. He imagined himself presenting results to clients, turning the account into a story of unparalleled success. Every morning, he arrived early, staying late, thinking, analyzing, envisioning every possible outcome. To him, this wasn't just business. It was personal. It was about proving to himself that he was capable of handling something that could make or break even the most seasoned professional. Yet, despite his confidence, there were moments that made him pause. A late-night call from an unknown number. Strange transfer he couldn't immediately explain. Discrepancies that didn't make sense at first glance. For a moment, he felt that familiar twinge of doubt creeping in. But it was fleeting. He had faced tougher challenges before. He reassured himself, telling himself that this was part of the process, that every great achievement came with hurdles, and that he was more than capable of overcoming them. His colleagues began to notice a change. He was more focused, more intense. He spoke less, listened more, and seemed almost consumed by the account. Some admired his dedication. Others worried about his obsession. But he didn't care. This account was a test, a proving ground, and he intended to pass it with flying colors. By the end of the week, he made his decision. He would take full control of the account. He would step into the role that others had feared, and he would make it his own. He signed the necessary documents, feeling a mixture of excitement and gravity. This was no longer just a rumor, no longer just a potential opportunity. It was real. It was his. And with it came responsibility, risk, and the chance to achieve something extraordinary. That evening, as he left the office, he looked out over the city lights and allowed himself a moment of reflection. He had always believed that success was earned through courage, hard work, and a willingness to face the unknown. Tomorrow, he would begin the journey with the $200 million account. A journey that promised challenges, triumphs, and perhaps dangers he could not yet imagine. For now, he felt alive, ready, and unstoppable. The game had begun, and he was determined to play it better than anyone else ever could. He woke early the next morning. The city still quiet under a pale sunrise. The thought of the $200 million account filled his mind with both excitement and a strange tension he couldn't shake. He knew that this was not just another challenge. This was different. This was something that could define his career forever or destroy everything he had built. He dressed quickly, skipped breakfast, and headed to the office, eager to immerse himself in the numbers and strategies that would dominate the day as soon as he arrived. He opened the account documents again, scanning through pages of transactions and investments. Each number told a story, and he felt like a detective piecing together a complex puzzle. Some transactions were straightforward, others were convoluted, almost intentionally so. It was clear to him that whoever had created this account had a mind for both detail and deception. He felt a surge of determination. He liked the challenge. It made him feel alive. By mid-morning, he called a small team of trusted analysts into his office. They were sharp, reliable, and used to working under pressure. He explained that they were dealing with something extraordinary. He instructed them to go over every line of the account, check every detail, and flag anything that seemed unusual. He stressed that no stone should be left unturned. The analysts worked quickly, their fingers flying over keyboards as they cross-checked documents, spreadsheets, and emails. The first few hours passed with an unusual intensity. Every so often, he would lean back in his chair, trying to see the account from a different angle, imagining all the possible outcomes. His mind moved fast, considering risks, calculating potential profits, and predicting where problems might arise. At the same time, he felt a growing sense of responsibility. This was not just about money. This was about reputation, about proving himself capable of handling something that others had feared. By late morning, the first signs of unusual activity began to appear. A few transactions didn't match the patterns he expected. He frowned, his eyes scanning the figures again and again. The discrepancies were small, subtle, almost invisible to anyone without a trained eye, but to him, they were glaring. He called one of his analysts over and asked them to review a particular set of transfers. The analyst hesitated for a moment, sensing that these anomalies could be important, then nodded and began to dig deeper. While the team worked, he allowed himself a brief moment of reflection. He remembered the warnings from his senior partner, the hushed conversations among colleagues, the quiet fear that others had felt when faced with this account. But he didn't feel fear. He felt excitement. Every risk he had taken before had shaped him into the man he was today, and he trusted his instincts. He knew that careful attention, bold decisions, and relentless focus would guide him through whatever came next. By early afternoon, more irregularities were emerging. Some investments had unexpected connections, moving through multiple entities before landing in one place. Some of the returns were unusually high for the level of risk involved. He felt a chill run down his spine for a moment, a tiny pulse of doubt, but he pushed it aside. Instead of fear, he felt determination. He would not let this account surprise him. He would control it, understand it, and use it to prove his skill. He spent hours in meetings with the analysts, reviewing strategies and discussing possible scenarios. Each suggestion was carefully weighed. Each potential risk was analyzed. He was relentless, almost obsessive in his pursuit of understanding. The team began to sense the intensity of his focus, and it motivated them. They matched his pace, their attention sharp, their calculations precise. The office felt like a war room, a place where every decision mattered and every detail could change the outcome. By mid-afternoon, he decided to take a step further. He wanted to see the account from the perspective of potential clients. He imagined how investors would react to the portfolio, how competitors might perceive the account, and what opportunities could arise from strategic moves. He began drafting potential plans, proposals, and presentations. Each idea was carefully thought out, each strategy tailored to maximize both profit and security. He could feel his mind racing, but it was a controlled racing, a deliberate focus that made him feel powerful. Late in the day, one of the analysts came to him with a concerning observation. A large transfer had occurred overnight, one that didn't fit the expected pattern. He studied the numbers, then reviewed the supporting documents. Something about the transfer made his stomach tighten. It was as if a small alarm bell had gone off, warning him that this account was more unpredictable than he had imagined. He called another meeting with his team, discussing the transfer in detail, considering its implications and brainstorming possible explanations. No one had a clear answer, but everyone agreed it was unusual. Instead of panicking, he felt a strange thrill. This was what he had wanted, a challenge that tested every skill he had. The unusual transfers, the anomalies in the account, they were opportunities to prove his ability to manage something complex, something others had feared. He encouraged his team to keep digging, to question everything, and to consider every angle. He wanted to understand the account completely, to see every possible risk and every possible advantage. As the evening approached, the office lights cast long shadows over the desks. He remained at his own, reviewing the day's findings and planning for the next. The analysts left one by one, exhausted but motivated, leaving him alone with the numbers that had consumed his thoughts all day. He looked over the account again, tracing the flow of funds, imagining the possibilities, and feeling the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. He paused for a moment, taking a deep breath, realizing that he was no longer just managing an account. He was in the middle of a living puzzle, one that required skill, courage, and unwavering focus. The account was unpredictable, challenging, and potentially dangerous. But it was also an opportunity to achieve something extraordinary. He knew that every decision he made in the coming days could have enormous consequences, both positive and negative, as he finally left the office. The city lights shimmering in the darkness, he felt a sense of purpose that he had never felt before. This account was more than just money. It was a test, a challenge, and a chance to prove himself. He walked through the streets, his mind alive with strategies and possibilities, feeling both the thrill and the tension of what lay ahead. Tomorrow, he would return, ready to face whatever the account had in store. Determined to navigate the complexity and emerged successful, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. That the $200 million account would continue to reveal surprises, tests, and challenges that would demand everything he had. But he welcomed it. For him, life had always been about facing the unknown, taking risks, and testing his limits. And now, with the account under his control, he felt more alive than ever, ready to embrace the challenges that would define the next chapter of his career. The next morning, he arrived at the office earlier than usual. There was a quiet intensity in the air, and he felt it in himself too. The $200 million account was no longer just a challenge. It was becoming something more complicated, almost unpredictable. The anomalies from the previous day were still on his mind. He spent the first hour reviewing every transaction again, trying to understand what might have caused the unusual transfer. It was meticulous work, tedious at times, but he felt that every detail mattered. Missing even the smallest irregularity could be disastrous. By mid-morning, he called a team meeting. The analysts were ready, but he could see their concern. They knew something had shifted. There was a tension in the room, a mix of excitement and unease. He explained that they needed to double their efforts. He asked questions no one had thought to ask before. How were certain funds moving? Why were some returns unusually high? Could there be mistakes? Or was something more deliberate happening? The team began working even harder, checking cross-references, tracking every transaction, and rechecking the accuracy of the data. While the analysts were busy, he began reviewing emails and communications related to the account. There were strange messages from clients and partners, some vague, others oddly urgent. He felt a twinge of unease. Usually, emails were straightforward, but these carried a subtle warning he couldn't ignore. He started connecting the dots, trying to find patterns, but the more he looked, the more complex it became. He realized that this account wasn't just large. It was layered, almost like a living organism that moved in unexpected ways. By noon, he discovered a series of small but significant discrepancies. A few investments had been redirected without proper authorization. Transfers were made to accounts he had never seen before. For a moment, he froze, staring at the screen. This wasn't ordinary. It was a red flag, and he felt the first real wave of fear he had experienced since taking control of the account. His mind raced. How had he missed these details before? How could such things happen under his supervision? He called in his most trusted analyst, someone who had worked with him for years. Together, they went over every line, every figure, every note. The anomalies were deliberate, almost too perfect to be accidental. It was as if someone had planned this carefully, and now he was in the middle of it. He felt a knot in his stomach but forced himself to stay calm. Panic would not help. Clarity would. The afternoon passed in a blur of investigation and analysis. He contacted a few senior partners for advice, though he revealed only part of what he had discovered. Their responses were cautious. They reminded him of the warnings he had received before taking over the account. They urged him to proceed carefully, to document everything, and to prepare for possible investigations. He nodded, understanding their advice, but also feeling the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. This was his problem now, his challenge, his potential downfall. By late afternoon, more irregularities began surfacing. Investments were shifting in ways he couldn't immediately explain. Returns were fluctuating, some extremely high, others dangerously low. Every new discovery added to the tension in the office. The analysts worked tirelessly, but it was clear that even they were feeling the strain. He could see the worry on their faces, the subtle doubts creeping in. He reminded them to stay focused, to trust the process. But inside, he knew that the situation was slipping beyond what he could control easily. He decided to take a short break, walk to the balcony overlooking the city. He tried to clear his mind, but the numbers followed him. He thought about every decision he had made since taking the account. Every assumption he had trusted, every risk he had taken. A sense of regret began to creep in, but he pushed it aside. He had faced challenges before, and he had always overcome them. He could handle this too, he told himself. He had too. Back at his desk, He drafted a plan to regain control of the account. He listed priorities: investigate unusual transfers, verify client instructions, cross-check every transaction, and establish clear oversight for future movements. He called his team together to explain the plan. Their eyes were wide with concern, but they trusted his judgment. Together, they began implementing the plan, systematically addressing each issue, checking every figure and correcting errors where possible. As the day turned into evening, a new problem emerged. A major client had called, angry and confused about a transfer they hadn't authorized. He felt the pressure mounting. Not only was the account complex and irregular, but now external parties were noticing discrepancies. He spoke with the client calmly, promising that everything would be investigated immediately. Inside, he felt a mix of frustration and fear. This was no longer just a test of skill. It was a test of endurance, judgment, and resilience. Throughout the night, he worked tirelessly, reviewing documents, tracking every irregularity, and coordinating with his team. The office lights burned late into the evening, casting long shadows over the desks. He barely noticed the time, fully immersed in the effort to stabilize the account. Occasionally, he paused, feeling the weight of responsibility pressing down. This was more than money. This was reputation, careers, and trust. One wrong move could ruin everything. By midnight, he finally leaned back, exhausted but determined. The anomalies were still there, but at least now they were understood, documented, and partially controlled. He had regained some sense of authority over the account, though he knew the situation was far from resolved. He allowed himself a brief moment of relief, knowing that the next day would bring new challenges, new surprises, and new tests of his skill and judgment. Before leaving the office, he glanced at the city skyline, lights flickering like distant stars. He realized that he was standing at the edge of something bigger than himself. The $200 million account was not just a challenge. It was a force that would test every aspect of his ability, patience, and resolve. And though he was tired and uneasy, he also felt a strange excitement. The game had changed, and he was right in the middle of it. The next moves would determine whether he could control it or whether it would control him. He left the office with a heavy but determined heart, knowing that sleep would be restless and the next day would demand even more from him. The account had revealed its first real threat, and he had survived. But he understood now that survival was only the beginning. The path ahead was uncertain, filled with challenges he could not yet imagine. He braced himself, ready to face whatever came next, determined not to let fear or doubt break him. Even as the shadows of the $200 million account grew longer and more ominous. The next morning, he arrived at the office with a sense of tension heavier than anything he had felt before. Overnight, he had gone over every detail he could remember, replaying every transaction and communication in his mind. The $200 million account was no longer just complex, it was threatening to slip out of his control. He knew that today. He would face the consequences of choices he had made, and decisions that had once seemed bold, but now teetered on the edge of disaster. He started his day reviewing emails and messages from the past 24 hours. There were more alerts than usual, notifications about unusual activity that had occurred while he slept. Each alert felt like a small hammer striking his chest. His mind raced through possible explanations, but none felt sufficient. Something larger was at play, and it was only now starting to show itself clearly. He called a meeting immediately, gathering his analysts and a few senior colleagues who had been cautiously monitoring the account. The meeting room was tense. He presented the anomalies he had discovered, outlining the irregular transfers, suspicious investments, and the unexplained discrepancies. Everyone listened quietly, some with concern, others with a hint of disbelief. He could feel the weight of the room pressing down on him, but he forced himself to stay calm. He explained that while some issues might be minor, the pattern suggested that there was a systemic problem, and it required immediate attention from both the team and the senior management. By mid-morning, he contacted the legal and compliance departments. He had learned that this account, while massive and impressive, carried risks that were beginning to attract regulatory attention. They agreed to conduct an urgent review. promising that auditors and specialists would work alongside him and his team to trace every irregularity. For the first time, he felt the full weight of scrutiny. This was no longer just a personal challenge. This was a formal investigation. The stakes had grown far beyond anything he had imagined. The hours passed in a whirlwind of calls, document reviews, and meetings. He tracked transactions line by line, reconciling balances, verifying authorizations, and explaining every movement to the auditors. Each discovery brought a mixture of relief and new concern. Some transfers could be justified, others could not. Every correction he made felt temporary, like patching a leak in a dam that might burst at any moment. He realized that the account was far more vulnerable than he had initially believed, and that even a small mistake could trigger a cascade of consequences. By late afternoon, news came from one of the auditors that shook him. Several large transfers had been flagged as suspicious, and the source accounts could not provide clear documentation. The authorities were beginning to take notice, and the situation was quickly escalating. He felt a cold panic creeping in, the kind that makes your hands shake even as you try to remain composed. He knew that this was a moment of reckoning. The choices he had made, the confidence he had placed in the account, and the decisions he had thought were bold, were now being scrutinized with a relentless intensity. He spent the next few hours coordinating with both his team and the auditors. Every move had to be precise. Every explanation had to be clear. He provided documents, emails, and notes, attempting to show that every decision was made with care and professionalism. Yet, despite his efforts, there were gaps and questions that he could not fully answer. Each missing piece felt like another weight added to the growing burden on his shoulders. By evening, news had spread beyond the office. A few key clients had been informed, some through official channels, others through rumor. He was called to speak directly with one client, a major investor who had placed a substantial amount under his management. The client's voice was calm but stern, their questions precise and probing. He explained the steps he had taken, the investigations underway, and the assurances from the auditors, but he could hear the underlying doubt. He knew that the trust he had built over years was now fragile, teetering on the edge. Late into the night, he sat alone in his office, the city lights shimmering outside the windows. He reviewed every transaction again, tracing each line, questioning every decision. The patterns were becoming clearer now. The scope of the irregularities undeniable. He realized that the account had been far more dangerous than he had imagined, that the early signs he had overlooked were warnings of a much larger problem. He felt a mixture of regret, frustration, and fear. He had taken control of something that was bigger than him, and now it was fighting back. Despite the fear, he refused to give in. He continued to work, calling in specialists, coordinating with auditors, and meticulously documenting every step. He understood that his professional reputation, the careers of his team, and the trust of clients were all at stake. Every hour was critical, and every decision mattered. He found a strange clarity in the chaos, a focus born of necessity. There was no room for error, no time for hesitation. The account had shown its power, and he had to respond with equal determination. As the night wore on, he received updates from auditors that some of the transfers had connections to complex networks, potentially fraudulent in nature. The reality hit him like a wave. He was caught in a situation that he could not fully control. The account had revealed its true nature, and the consequences were becoming unavoidable. He felt the weight of responsibility pressing down, but also a determination to manage the fallout as best as he could. This was no longer just about profit. This was about survival, integrity, the ability to face the consequences of his actions. By the early hours of the next morning, he finally allowed himself a brief pause. The office was quiet. The only sound, the hum of computers, and the distant city below. He reflected on the journey that had brought him here, the ambition, the confidence, the bold decisions, and now the unraveling reality. The $200 million account had started as a challenge, then became an obsession. And now it was a force that was testing every skill, every judgment. In every ounce of his resolve, he knew that the coming days would bring more scrutiny, more questions, and more pressure. He could no longer rely on instincts alone. He needed precision, honesty, and strategy. The exposure was complete. The account had shown its power, and the consequences were real. He braced himself for the next phase, aware that the choices he made now would define not just his career, but the lives of everyone involved. As he finally left the office, the first light of dawn breaking across the horizon, he felt the full weight of what had happened. The $200 million account had taken him to the edge, testing his skills, patience, and resilience. He knew that there was no turning back. The exposure was complete, and now he had to face the consequences. Navigate the fallout and find a way to survive both professionally and personally. The game had changed entirely, and the account had revealed its true nature, a force that could not be ignored, and a challenge that would define the rest of his life. The days after the exposure were the hardest he had ever faced. The $200 million account, which had once been a source of pride and ambition, became a weight that pressed down on every part of his life. News of the irregularities had spread, and the office felt tense and quiet, as if everyone was waiting for the next shoe to drop. He arrived early every morning, exhausted from sleepless nights, and stayed late into the evening, trying to piece together what had gone wrong and how to manage the consequences. He spent hours meeting with auditors, regulators, and legal advisors. Every transaction was examined again, every document scrutinized. He explained what he had known, what he had done, and how he had attempted to manage the account responsibly. Some questions were simple, some difficult, and others were accusatory. Each answer required careful thought, honesty, and a deep understanding of the complex web of investments he had overseen. He felt the strain of responsibility on his shoulders more acutely than ever before. The team he had worked with also faced pressure. Some colleagues were frustrated, some fearful, and some quietly angry. Yet they continued to work with him, following his guidance as best as they could. He realized that leadership was not just about making decisions. When things go well, it was about guiding others through chaos and uncertainty. He tried to keep morale high, even when his own confidence wavered. He reminded himself that panic would not help anyone, and that careful, deliberate action was the only way forward. Outside of work, life felt surreal. Calls from friends and family were met with brief reassurances, but he could feel their concern. He knew that his reputation, once solid and respected, was now fragile. People whispered, speculated, and wondered what had happened. He tried to shield himself from the noise, focusing on the work at hand, but the weight of judgment was always present. It was a new kind of pressure, one that no training or experience had fully prepared him for. Each day brought new challenges. Some clients threatened to withdraw their funds, worried about the irregularities. Some demanded meetings, explanations, and assurances. He spoke calmly, detailing the steps being taken to correct errors and prevent further issues. He emphasized transparency, honesty, and diligence. Slowly, he saw that some trust could be rebuilt, but he knew it would take time, patience, and consistent effort. Trust, once broken, was not easily restored. Even with progress, there were moments of despair. Late at night, alone in the office, he reflected on the journey that had led him here. He remembered the excitement of taking control of the account, the thrill of handling something extraordinary, and the pride of proving himself capable. Now, those memories were tinged with regret. He understood how overconfidence, ambition, and a desire for recognition had blinded him to early warning signs. The account had tested him in ways he had not anticipated, exposing both his strengths and his vulnerabilities. Despite the setbacks, he refused to give up. He continued to work tirelessly, coordinating with auditors and colleagues, and ensuring that every corrective action was properly documented. He also began to reflect more deeply on what had happened, considering not just the immediate financial issues, but the broader lessons about responsibility, caution, and the unpredictable nature of large-scale investments. He realized that success required more than skill and ambition. It required humility, foresight, and an understanding that some forces are beyond complete control. Over time, some stability returned. Investigations clarified the origins of the discrepancies, and corrective actions helped restore confidence among clients and regulators. The account was no longer an uncontrollable force, though it had permanently changed the landscape of his career. He could see the path forward, but he also understood that things would never be the same. The experience had reshaped his understanding of risk, trust, and the consequences of decisions made under pressure. In the quiet moments, he allowed himself reflection. He thought about the journey from ambition to crisis, from control to exposure, and finally to cautious recovery. He understood that the $200 million account had been more than a financial challenge. It had been a lesson in humility, vigilance, and the limits of human control. He also recognized the importance of integrity, transparency, and accountability, qualities that had become essential not just for surviving the crisis, but for rebuilding his career and reputation. He began sharing his experiences with younger colleagues, mentoring them on the importance of caution, thoroughness, and ethical responsibility. He emphasized that ambition, without attention to detail, could lead to disaster, and that even the most skilled individuals could be tested by circumstances beyond their control. Through these conversations, he found a sense of purpose. He could not undo the past, but he could use the lessons learned to guide others, helping them avoid the same mistakes. As months passed, life gradually returned to a new normal. He had rebuilt parts of his professional reputation, earned back some trust, and regained control of his work. The $200 million account was no longer a source of thrill or obsession. It was a reminder of the risks inherent in ambition and the importance of vigilance. He carried the lessons with him, aware that the future would always contain challenges and uncertainties, but confident that he had grown stronger and wiser from the experience in quiet moments. He still thought about the day when the account had first been revealed, and the sense of disbelief that had washed over him. That can't be real. At the time, he had been certain that he could handle anything. Now, he knew that reality was far more complex, unpredictable, and demanding than he had imagined. Yet, he also knew that he had survived, learned, and adapted. The experience had changed him, but it had not broken him. The final lesson, he realized, was one of balance. Ambition, skill, and confidence were valuable, but they needed to be tempered with caution, humility, and ethical responsibility. The $200 million account had tested every aspect of his character, revealing both strengths and vulnerabilities. And though the journey had been painful, exhausting, and at times terrifying, it had also made him more resilient, more aware, and more capable of facing future challenges. He walked through the city streets one evening, reflecting on the experience. The lights glimmered on the pavement, the sounds of life carried on around him, and he felt a sense of quiet resolution. The account had taken him to the edge, shown him the limits of control, forced him to confront the consequences of his decisions. But he had emerged with a deeper understanding of himself, the financial world, and the importance of vigilance and integrity. He had faced the storm and survived. And now he was ready to move forward, wiser, stronger, and prepared for whatever came next. Even after months had passed, he could not shake the feeling that the $200 million account had left a permanent mark on him. The experience had reshaped the way he approached work, risk, and trust. He arrived at the office one morning, a little later than usual, carrying the quiet awareness that life could change in moments and that even the most careful plans could unravel unexpectedly. The city outside was alive, but inside him there was a calm determination. He had survived the storm, but he knew he could not afford to be complacent. The morning began like any other, the meetings scheduled back to back. He went over reports, checked new transactions, and reviewed client portfolios. Yet he did so with a different mindset now. He looked not just for profit, but for consistency, transparency, and risk. He asked questions he had never considered before, challenged assumptions that had once seemed obvious, and encouraged his team to think critically about every decision. There was a quiet seriousness in his approach, a balance of confidence and caution that had not existed before the account had tested him. One of his analysts approached him with news about a new potential client, someone interested in investing a significant sum. The opportunity was tempting, the kind that could make headlines and build reputation. He listened carefully, weighing every detail. Unlike before, he did not rush. He asked for thorough verification, background checks, and detailed projections. The analyst noticed the change in him and nodded, understanding that the lessons of the past had left their mark. Ambition was still present, but it was tempered by wisdom and caution. As the day went on, he received a call from a regulatory official. The conversation was calm but serious. There were updates regarding the investigations into the previous account. He listened carefully, answered questions with clarity, and documented every detail. Though he had faced scrutiny before, this time there was a sense of resolution. The authorities had seen the effort, the transparency, and the corrective actions he had implemented. There were no penalties. But the experience remained a reminder of the delicate balance between opportunity and risk. During lunch, he walked through the city streets, reflecting on how quickly life could change. The $200 million account had once been a symbol of success and ambition. Now it was a lesson etched into his memory. He thought about the long hours, the stress, the fear, and the small victories that had allowed him to navigate the chaos. He realized that the experience had strengthened him, sharpened his instincts, and given him a new appreciation for the responsibilities that came with handling wealth and trust. Back in the office, he held a team meeting. He spoke candidly about the lessons learned, the importance of diligence, and the value of questioning assumptions. He encouraged everyone to share their observations, to challenge norms, and to think critically about every decision. The room was attentive, absorbing both his experience and his advice. He wanted them to understand that mistakes could happen, but preparation, awareness, and integrity could prevent disaster, or at least minimize the consequences. Later in the afternoon, he reviewed a complex investment proposal. It was tempting, but he examined every detail carefully, weighing risks against potential rewards. He noticed subtle inconsistencies, small gaps that could become significant if ignored. Unlike before, he did not dismiss them. He paused, asked for clarification, and waited for answers. His patience, once considered cautious or even hesitant, now felt like strength. He was learning that sometimes restraint and attention were more valuable than boldness alone. As the evening approached, he reflected on his journey. The account had tested him in ways he had never imagined. It had exposed both his abilities and his vulnerabilities. It had shown him that confidence without caution could lead to disaster, but that perseverance, humility, and thoroughness could guide a person through even the most complicated situations. He thought about the long nights, the stress, and the moments of doubt, and he realized how much he had grown. Experience, he now knew, was more than knowledge. It was wisdom born of challenge. The office quieted as employees left for the day. He stayed a little longer, reviewing the day's work. He thought about how he could help others avoid the mistakes he had made, how he could mentor younger colleagues, and how he could share the lessons he had learned without instilling fear. He wrote notes, drafted training material, and prepared strategies for improving processes. His ambition had evolved. It was no longer about prestige or recognition alone, but about leadership, responsibility, and guidance. On his way home, he stopped at a quiet park, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The city lights began to flicker on, and he felt a sense of peace. The account had challenged him, changed him, and taught him lessons that would last a lifetime. He realized that the true measure of success was not in the size of the account, the profits made, or the recognition received, but in the ability to navigate challenges with integrity, to learn from mistakes, and to emerge stronger. Over the following weeks, he implemented new practices in his team. They focused on transparency, communication, and careful review of every decision. He shared stories from the $200 million account, not to instill fear, but to highlight the importance of diligence and responsibility. The team responded positively, becoming more cohesive, alert, and confident. He felt a sense of accomplishment, not from the money or the reputation, but from knowing that the experience had been transformed into learning and growth. He also took time to reflect personally. He reconnected with family and friends, sharing his experiences in small, honest ways. He realized that life was fragile, that opportunities came with risks, and that every choice carried consequences. The account had been a turning point, but it had also been a teacher. He felt gratitude for having survived the challenges, for the lessons learned, and for the chance to apply those lessons in meaningful ways. As months turned into a year, he began to see the long-term effects of the experience. His decision-making became sharper, his patience deeper, and his judgment more balanced. He approached new opportunities with a blend of ambition and caution, aware of both potential rewards and risks. He mentored others, sharing the story of the $200 million account as a guide, a warning, and an inspiration. He realized that the account had given him more than challenges, it had given him wisdom. One evening, while reviewing reports, he paused and thought back to the day he first saw the account and muttered, "That can't be real." At the time, it had been a moment of disbelief and excitement. Now, he understood that the account had been both real and transformative. It had challenged him, humbled him, and ultimately strengthened him. He smiled quietly to himself, knowing that while the account had tested him, it had also prepared him for the future in ways nothing else could. He walked home through the quiet streets, reflecting on the journey. The lessons of patience, vigilance, humility, and integrity were etched into his mind. He knew that life would always present challenges, some expected, others unforeseen. But he also knew that he had grown capable of facing them, guided by experience and shaped by lessons learned the hard way. The $200 million account had left its mark, but it had also given him resilience, clarity, and a renewed sense of purpose. In the quiet of his apartment, he sat by the window watching the city lights shimmer. He thought about the future, about the work ahead, and about the people he could now guide with wisdom born of experience. He knew that opportunities and challenges would come again, but he felt ready. The account had taken him to the edge and shown him the reality of risk and consequence. But it had also taught him that careful action, integrity, and reflection could turn even the most difficult situations into lessons and growth. And with that understanding, he finally felt a sense of calm, prepared to face whatever the future might hold.